Hi everyone, welcome to Smriti Special. I'm Smriti Iyer and we are at the art studio today. I'm going to show you how to make a really delicious, really basic egg-free vanilla butter cake today. So let's get started. A couple of weeks ago over on my Instagram, we had a discussion about how to create different flavors of cakes or any other thing for that matter from one base recipe. Now from this cake recipe, I'm going to show you how to build up flavors and make a million different kinds of cakes. So before we get started with the cake, I'm going to discuss with you a bunch of ingredients here which we're using and what you can change and what you can't change and things like that. So let's tuck into it first. Whenever you see any cake recipe, you can broadly divide them into different categories of ingredients. For example, this is an egg-free recipe, so we don't have eggs here, but we do have other things to compensate for the egg. So for example, we have our dry ingredients. In this case, it's only the flour, okay. Then we have the leavening agents, which is going to be your baking soda and baking powder, okay. Then we have our sweetener, which is going to be our sugar in this case. Then we have fats. In this case, we have two kinds of fats. We have our cream cheese as well as the butter, okay. And then we have our liquids. So in this case, our liquids are going to be milk and vanilla extract. So this is the broad categories. Now when you look at changing the cake flavors, what you can't touch especially is going to be your baking soda and baking powder. This is not going to change come what may. And also the proportions between the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients and the fat and the sugar, that's not supposed to change, okay, because we are talking about one particular cake recipe. So doesn't have to be this. You can apply the principles of this to your own cake recipes if you want. Before we start making our cake, what I want to mention here is that this base recipe that I'm giving you is a butter based cake. There are oil based cake recipes which are different from butter based cakes. There are so many cake recipes, all of them will have different textures, okay. This is a vanilla butter cake, so it's going to have a buttery kind of like a pound cake texture, which you can not just use as a pound cake like as a tea cake, you can also use it as sponges if you want. So all the flavor variations that we are going to do in the future videos are also going to be butter based cakes. So they are all going to have the same texture, but they're going to have starkly different flavors, okay. So I just want you guys to keep this in mind before you attempt any of these recipes. Now today I'm going to bake this cake in a 6-inch pan here. This is a loose bottom pan, okay. Now you can use a regular pan. You don't have to use a loose bottom pan if you don't have one. So feel free to use whatever you have. Now you can also bake this recipe in an 8-inch pan. In a 6-inch pan, it will be more batter, so it will have more height. In an 8-inch pan, it will be less batter and it will be less height. So it's pretty simple, okay. Now I'm going to prepare this with some butter, okay. Since I'm using a metal pan and this is not non-stick, I have to use some butter and flour. When I was a child, I used to bake with my mom and she wouldn't even let me start the baking procedure with her without doing this pan first, because she would always say that the first step is always to prepare the pans. So I agree with her. Okay, so put generous amounts of butter. I'm using a pastry brush to do this. You can do it by hand if you want. It doesn't really matter as long as every bit of it has a layer of butter, okay. And now we are going to add some flour. So at first you add generous amounts, okay, on the sides as well, and then you just want to shake all the flour, okay, all around, everywhere, and then whatever excess you have, just tip it over onto your tray and then you can reuse that. If you have like a little fingertip or something touch the bottom, just put a little more flour over there. But don't have a very thick layer of butter and flour because that's going to show on your cake and that won't be pretty. So just make sure that you have a thin layer. I have a large bowl here with a sieve and I'm going to pass my all-purpose flour through this. What happens when we do this is that it aerates the flour, and we are going to add our leavening agents, baking soda and baking powder. That all of these get mixed really well when we sieve it, okay? And if you have any big lumps like this in any of your leavening agents, that gets sieved through as well. To my warm milk over here, make sure for this recipe that your milk is warm, okay? Not hot, not super cold, warm, okay? Now to this, I'm going to add vanilla extract. Now this is my homemade vanilla extract. I have a recipe video for this on my YouTube channel, and I'm going to post a link on the description. So you can use that or any vanilla you like, but this is super good. So I'm going to add some of this into our milk as well. Okay, since this is a vanilla cake, I'm going heavy on vanilla. You can add a little less if you want. So that is our liquids. So today I'm making this cake in a stand mixer with a paddle attachment. You can definitely 100% use a hand mixer. Okay, so I have my softened butter here. Make sure that your butter is softened and not cold, because otherwise it's just not going to whip up. To this, I'm going to add the cream cheese. Now this cream cheese is going to give a really amazing texture to this whole cake. This cream cheese is also at sort of softened temperature, okay? It shouldn't be melty, but it shouldn't be cold as well. So that's what we want. Now to this, we are going to add our sugar. Now I'm using some fine caster sugar. You can use some powdered sugar, which I've done many times. And now I'm going to beat this together until it's nice and fluffy. Now after about 40 seconds or a minute or so, it started to get combined, okay? Now I want to point out that this recipe is for 1 8-inch cake, okay? If you're making a larger size of cake, you want to first beat together the butter and the cream cheese and then add the sugar, because otherwise if you're making a larger batch, it's not going to come together well in larger quantities, okay? So I'm going to beat it again for about 2 to 3 minutes. All right guys, look at this now, how beautiful and nice it is. Also, if you're using a stand mixer like me, then just go around the bowl of your stand mixer and just get everything from the sides. Into our whipped butter, sugar and cream cheese mixture, now we are going to add our flour and leavening agents a little at a time. So we add a little bit of that and a little bit of our milk here, okay? And then we are going to gently mix it together. So if you're using a stand mixer, go on just speed number 1. Doing this process slowly just helps incorporate everything together, okay? I'm going to add, since this is a smaller cake, I'm just adding all of it, okay? And then the rest of our milk as well, okay? We're going to gently mix it again. All right, that is our lovely, delicious smelling cake batter. So now I'm going to put my cake batter into this prepared cake pan, okay? Now as I said before, I'm making a 6-inch cake because I want some height to this, okay? You can do an 8-inch cake. Now the difference is that you're going to bake them at the same temperature but at a different time frame, okay? So when you do the same batter in a smaller pan with more height in the batter, then you have to bake it for longer because it's going to take that much time for the heat to reach the center, okay? If you're going to make the same cake batter in an 8-inch pan, obviously that's bigger, so the height of the cake is going to be lesser, so it's going to take lesser time to reach the center of the cake, okay? Just flattening this up. Now this is going to go in a preheated oven at 170 degrees Celsius for about 40 minutes since this is a 6-inch cake. If you're doing an 8-inch cake, it'll take lesser. So about, let's say, 25 to 30 minutes. Keep a check on it until it's nice and golden on top, and then we'll serve. This cake baked in the oven for about 42 minutes to perfection. Now, it might take a little bit lesser or a little bit more time in your oven, so keep an eye on it. Another little thing that I want to mention is that around the 35-minute mark, the top of my cake was perfectly brown, the brown that I wanted. So I tinted it with an aluminum foil to stop it from browning any further. So you can do that and then put it back into the oven. There are two ways to check whether your cake is done or not. Okay. One of the ways, which is the best and the oldest, is to put a skewer and then twist the skewer a little bit. If it comes out absolutely clean like this, then the cake is baked. Another thing is that when you press the top of a cake gently, it should spring back, okay? And it should have left the sides of the cake pan. So these are a couple of things that you can keep in mind if you are baking a cake for the first time. And now we're going to let it cool down for about 15 minutes or so, and then we're going to put it on a wire rack to cool down further. Now my cake is cooled down in the pan a little bit. Why we do this is so that it comes off from the sides of the pan, okay, which helps us unmold everything. So if you want to take help, you can just run an offset spatula like this or a knife, okay, something that will not ruin your pan, okay. What happens if we let it cool down completely in the pan is that it's going to have some condensation and it's going to be wet on the bottom. So you don't want that. You don't want any of this cake to be sticky. So now I'm going to invert it onto my wire rack. If you don't have a wire rack, just invert it onto your rack from the microwave. Okay, now we're going to let it cool down completely before we dig in. Make sure that in between your baking, you do not open the oven door until at least 3/4 of the time is done, because if you do that and this doesn't have eggs, this will sink from the center. Okay, so refrain from opening the oven door, because what's going to happen is that it's going to get a temperature shock, and the rising that's been happening constantly is going to stop and it's going to have a crater in the center. So you don't want that. Okay, so you can open the oven door after 3/4 of the time. Now my cake has cooled down completely. I'm going to transfer it with my big knife here to my cutting surface. Okay, now I'm not dressing it up too much because this is a simple and beautiful and nice cake. So I'm just adding a little bit of icing sugar on top. I have a long serrated knife here which I'm using to cut this cake. You can use any sharp knife. So let's check out the texture. Make sure that your cake is either just warm or cold before you cut into it. Okay, look at the texture. How beautiful, rich, buttery. So guys, this is my egg-free vanilla butter cake recipe. I hope you like it. I hope you make lots and lots of this and use it in your cake recipes or just as a tea cake. And whenever you do, share a picture with me on Facebook, Instagram, wherever. Tag me so I can see your recreations. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss on any of the updates. I'll see you again next time with another cake recipe. Bye.